If you want to get a job done right, you better have the right tools with you. When it comes to analyzing poker math and doing any sort of poker math between sessions, it's very, very important that you have a good poker calculator and the correct calculator for the exact task you're working on. So today I want to run you through 7 poker calculators that you better be using between sessions, or at least have handy just in case you need them. Let's get started. Good morning, how are we doing today? My name is James Sweeney, aka Split Suit, and today I want to run you through 7 different poker calculators I've created over the years. I've created many more as well. They're all included in my Split Suit spreadsheet pack, say that 5 times fast, and you can grab all of them today at splitsuit.com/sheets. It is a name your own price product, and you can add $0 in there if you have a lower bankroll at the moment. Get them all and play around with them, or throw in a few chips and get some bonuses and nice goodies as well. But without further ado, let's jump right into it. Alright, the first one we're going to look at is the basic EV spreadsheet, and we will be using the advanced poker workbook for this one. Flip over to page number 82, and here is the scenario. Blinds 501k with 60k effective, you open to 2.5k, they 3-bet to 9, you 4-bet to 18k total, and they go all in. So let's ignore the blinds in our calculation as per the question, and here we go. And we're going to get started with the pocket 10s here, and this is the range that we think our opponent is shoving right this moment. Alright, so let's pop open the basic EV spreadsheet, and it's a pretty simple one. We just need to add a couple different numbers. One is money won, so essentially when we win, how much do we make, how often are we going to actually win it, and then how much do we lose the times that we do lose. And the nice thing is that if we know how often we're going to win, we inherently know how often we're going to lose, since it's 100% minus that number. That's why this autofills to 60. In this situation, if this number were 51, it would automatically change to 49. That's baked right into the spreadsheet. So let's add in the numbers and go forward from there. So let's go right down the list and start with the money won. So when we do call and win, how much are we winning? Well, our opponent has the effective stack, the smallest of the stacks involved between the two of us. So we would win their 60k stack plus our 18k 4-bet that is already locked into the middle, and we're ignoring blinds in the calculation, so the pot would be 78k. So that is the money won in the situation, 78, 1, 2, 3 zeros. Wonderful. When we lose, how much are we losing? Well, we're losing the 60k minus the 18 we've already put in, so we can just go in here, and if you're good with Excel, just the equal sign, 60,000 minus 18,000. Perfect. That is the money L. And then we need to know how often we're going to win. So essentially, what is our equity when we call in this situation? To get this, we can use a basic tool like Flopzilla Pro, plug in our opponent's range, which is taken directly from the answer key, put in our hole cards, right? 10 of spades, 10 of diamonds. Perfect. And we can see right down below our equity for our pocket 10s is 46.3. Just round that to 46 just to make things a little bit easier. Pop that in there, and you see the EV is positive to the tune of $13,200. And if we check the answer key for this one real quick, page number 82, we have their range, we have our pocket 10s, EV of calling plus 13.2k. Perfect. Everything is looking all good so far. And this is a really, really good spreadsheet for doing calculations, especially when calling shoves at any given point, be it pre-flop or post-flop. This is exactly when you would want to use the basic EV spreadsheet. All right, the next calculator we're going to look at is extremely simple, but very powerful, especially if you've never worked with it before, and that is the break-even percentage calculator. So let's look at this one. All right, so for this, we're going to flip over to page 176, again, still in the advanced poker workbook. The prompt is it's a 5-10 cash game. You open to 25, they defend the big blind, they check call your 25 c-bet, and you barrel 100 into 105 on the turn after they check. Here's the board, here's your hand, here's their range, and the first question is what is the break-even percentage of this bet? And for this, we could use the break-even percentage calculator, which is extremely simple. It's looking at your risk and the reward. So your risk is the size of your bet, and the reward is the size of the pot that you are fighting for. So right this moment, we are risking $100, since that is the prompt right here, and then the reward is the current size of the pot before we bet, which is 105 given the entire prompt. So the break-even percentage is 49%, and that is what we would add in right here. So again, this is a pretty basic calculation, but one that you definitely want to understand, especially as it relates to auto profit. So auto profit is essentially, is your opponent folding more often than the break-even percentage requirement of the bet? If so, it is auto profitable, and you can fire with pretty much any 2 cards with impunity opportunity, and that can be a very, very lucrative bluff for you. So if we take this first situation, you suspect they're only going to give your bet action with top pair plus, all 8+ out draws, and fold everything else. If we plug all of this into Flopzilla, this is the board, this is their range, this is our hand, and we say, okay, they're going to continue with top pair better, flush draws, open-ended straight draws, fold everything else. They are continuing 61% of the time, folding 39% of the time. 39 is lower than 49, and this is not going to be auto profitable. However, what if we had a different bet size? Instead of betting almost pot, we decided to fire here for something like 40. Well, now all of a sudden notice the break-even percentage is 28, and of course our opponent is still folding that same 39% based upon the assumptions we're making, and that would be an auto profitable bluff. So this is how you can use the basic calculator to find some very plus EV plays in your overall game. Alright, so this next one might look a little bit scary, but we'll go through it together step by step. This is the river bet versus check EV spreadsheet. Let's look at it. Alright, so let's flip over to page 21, again still in the advanced poker workbook, this time in the river play making bet section. The prompt is 5-10 cash game, you open raise preflop, they defend their big blind, you delay c-bet the turn, meaning the flop went check check, and they check the river. So here's the board, here's our hand, here's their range, and first question is what's the EV of checking, and then we're also going to compare that to the EV of betting. And for this, again, we could use the river bet versus check EV spreadsheet. So to use this, we just need to fill in a couple of different numbers, and you notice that this spreadsheet is chunked into two major sections. The top is the EV of checking the river behind, exactly like this spot, and then the other is the EV of betting the river. And the betting the river is a little bit simplified because it's not looking at spots where you bet, your opponent check raises, and you might end up giving some sort of action. Since most players, especially in games most of us play, do not bluff check raise the river or really check raise the river with anything other than the nuts, we're just use a simplification. It should be totally fine. So the pot size right this moment before we bet would be 115. We see that in the image right here, and the first thing we need to know is when we check this river behind, how often are we winning, and by extension, how often are we losing, which of course is going to be 100% minus how often we check behind and win. So in Flopzilla, with everything plugged in right this moment, we have our ace 10. You notice the equity for our hand against their entire range is 82%, so that's what we would use right here. The check and win is 82, automatically fills the check and lose at 18%, and we notice the EV of checking this behind is plus 94 bucks. And while that information is all well and good, we also want to compare it to the EV of betting the river. So again, pot size 115, our bet size given the prompt would be if they only give our $60 bet action with these hands, so the bet size would be 60 that we're going to first explore. But notice in the workbook we get a couple different exercises. One is betting 60 and getting this sort of action, the other is betting 100 and getting this sort of action. We're just going to look at the 61 for the moment. So we bet 60, and then when we do that, what is our win percentage when called if they're only giving our $60 bet action with middle pair or better and folding everything else? So let's plug that in right this moment, middle pair or better. Notice that they are going to be continuing 71% of the time, thus folding the other 29. So we can plug that in right here when it says how often would they fold. Well, we know that's going to be the 29% of the time. And our win percentage when called in Flopzilla, we can hit this button. This is going to mark in only these hands, and then the equity is for our hand against their entire continuance range, which we kind of just denoted as middle pair plus, and that gives us an equity of 74%. So we can go right in there, win percentage when called 74. Perfect. And we see the EV is plus 114, so a little bit higher for betting the river instead of just checking it behind. And for the record, in the workbook itself, you can plug all of these answers, just type them all right in. So plus 94 bucks right here, how often they fold, you can plug all that stuff in, but overall the EV of betting is plus 114. Check the answer key just to make sure we're on the right track. Page 21, the EV of betting 60 is 114, good, and the EV of checking behind is 94 bucks. Perfect. And just for the record, the EV of checking is going to be the exact same against both of these, since that's the range they have anyway. And then what you do is you say, okay, well, what's the EV of checking? What's the EV of betting one number and getting a certain continuance? What about betting a different number and getting different continuance? This is really good exploration, but I'll leave you to do some of that on your own. Now you know how to use the river bet versus check EV spreadsheet. All right, the next spreadsheet we're going to look at is called the multiple folder spreadsheet. This is particularly particularly useful if you play in games where you tend to have a lot of multi-way pots, but let's just run through it from an example, again, from the Advanced Poker Workbook. Alright, so this is page number 50 from the stealing section. The prompt is you steal for 2.5k after it folds to you on the button, and here we are right here, roughly 40 big blinds effective to start the hand, and we have a couple different ranges down below, the small blinds defense range and also the big blinds defense range, and it's not 100% perfect, right, because if the small blind continues, it might change the big blind's overall continuance range, so it's not 100% fair. If they fold, they might continue a little bit differently, but this is a great starter ballpark, so let's just run with it right this moment. So the small blinds defense range, we need the percentage form for that, and also the percentage form for the big blinds defense range. We can grab the range directly from the answer key, plug it into Flopzilla. For the small blind, we notice this is a 28% continuance, which of course means that they are folding the other 72% of the time. So pop that right in there. For the other player, again from the answer key, let's just grab their range, page number 50, grab it from right there, go into Flopzilla, clear out, paste in, and you notice that they are at 73, which means the other 27 is how often they are going to be folding. Perfect, and we notice that we can expect folds from everyone 19% of the time, so that would be the answer we would pop in right here. Check the answer key just to make sure we're on the right track. Perfect, both players are folding 19% of the time. So this is how we can use the multiple folder spreadsheet to say, okay, based upon the folding frequency of player 1 and also player 2, how often will collectively they both fold? This is the number that we have right here. And while you can use this sort of calculator for doing basic things like preflop steals, you can also use this for multi-way c-bets or multi-way barrels, all that sort of fun stuff. And if you continued even just on this question, if you raised to 3.2k instead of just up to 2.5, and the small blind and big blind instead continued at 20% and 45% of the time respectively, we can answer this question as well quite simply, right? If their small blind's continuing 20% of the time, means they're folding the 80. If the big blind's continuing 45%, that inherently means they're folding the 55. And you notice that we can expect folds from both of them 44% of the time, which is much higher than the previous answer. The next calculator is a little bit advanced, but definitely one you want to have in your tool bag for off-table exploration. And this is the pot geometry calculator, essentially looking at what the final pot size is. If you go bet, 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 your opponent goes continue, 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 and looking at what every dollar put or not put into the middle is going to do to the final pot size. So let's go through an example together. Alright, so let's flip over to page 31. The prompt is this is a 5-10 cash game. They open pre-flop, you 3-bet, they call your 3-bet, and they check to you on the flop. You have kings here on Jack 5-4 rainbow, and we're breaking this into two different questions down below. One is if you use one bet sizing strategy, what does the pot geometry look like across all streets? And then number two is if you choose a different bet sizing strategy, this way you can compare the two more easily side by side. So let's just do the top one together and I'll show you how to use the pot geometry spreadsheet. Very, very simple. So we just need to plug in a couple different things. So the first thing we need to add is the starting effective stack right this moment, which as we see, the smallest of the stacks involved right this moment is our opponent's 2650 stack, so 2650, perfect. The pot size to start the street right this moment is 175 before we bet or do anything, and again this is simplified because it's looking at spots where we bet, our opponent calls, they're going to check call the next street and also check call the next street after that. So the first question is saying, okay, well what if you bet 60% pot on every single street? So right down below here we can just plug in a couple basic numbers, and because we're betting the same 0.6 or 60% on every single street, we can just simply autofill all of these for 0.6, and you notice the spreadsheet automatically starts updating and calculating, and this is everything we would need right this moment. So it tells us exactly what our bet size would be. If we were betting 60% right this moment on the flop, that would be 105. If our opponent calls, our turn bet's going to be 231 into a 385 pot, etc. And it also shows you what the pot size is going to be after they call you, what the effective stack sizes are going to be, and this is extremely helpful. And you can plug all this stuff in, you can type directly into the workbook. I'm not going to go through that right this moment, but this is how you can use this calculator. And you could even go a step further and say, okay, well I actually want to compare that to the next prompt, which is the same exact exact parameters. The same starting effective stack is still 2650, the pot size to start the street still 175. However, instead of betting 60% pot on every single street, we're going to bet full pot. So all of these will become 1 and 1 and 1, and you notice all of a sudden that pot size, after they call, that final pot size gets much larger. This is how you can really start saying, okay, well, based upon the bet size and strategy I'm thinking about, how is that going to impact the final pot size, and does that final pot size work with the goal of my particular hand, given the particular texture, given my particular opponent? That's getting a little bit outside of the overall usage right this moment in this basic video, but that's how you can start taking the work you do with this calculator and getting some extra value from it. But now at least you know how to use the pot geometry calculator. Definitely make sure to spend a little bit of time with this. It's particularly useful if you've never worked with bet sizing or thinking about a bet sizing strategy before. Alright, the next calculator we're going to look at is called the Runouts Calculator. This is very good for starting to understand how often good versus bad things are going to happen in general based upon the parameter set you put into it. So let's run through an example together. Alright, so this is from page 105 in the complete runout section. We're just going to do this top one together. So we have pocket 10s, board is 863 rainbow, and the prompt is how often will the runout contain 0 overcards to your pocket 10s. So we can use the runout spreadsheet in order to get the answer for this, and if you open this up, you notice that there are two different tabs down below. There are AND statements and OR statements, and the way you want to think about it is based upon the question, is it likely asking an AND or an OR kind of question? So in this situation, how often will the runout contain 0 overcards to your pocket 10s? So we're asking how often is the turn and the river not going to contain a jack or higher. So we know automatically when we kind of formulate it and force ourselves to use an AND or an OR statement, that's definitely going to be an AND. We're not asking an OR, we're asking how often will the runout contain 0 overcards on the turn and the river. So we can stick right here in the AND statement and start plugging in some very basic numbers. Now we just need to fill in these two blue cells, and essentially we are looking at what our quote hit cards are. So what constitutes a good card for us based upon the question that's being asked means it's not a jack or higher. It could be a 10, could be a 9, could pair the board, could be a brick 4, could be anything like that. It doesn't matter. We're just saying how often is it not going to contain a jack plus. And of course we know that there are 47 unseen cards right this moment, our 2 whole cards plus the 3 on the board, so 52 cards in the deck minus the 5 we can see equals 47 unknown unseen cards, and then once the turn card comes off there will be 46 remaining going from the turn into the river. But we still need to factor in the hit cards right this moment. And if you're a visual person like I am, sometimes it's helpful to plug everything into something like Flopzilla and just count the individual cards. So count how many jacks, how many queens, how many kings, how many aces are left in the deck, and we know 4 times 4 gets us to 16. So there are 16 things that consider being bad cards for the condition, right? We're saying how often is a hit going to be a card that is not a jack or higher. So we can do this very simply. We can either do the math or we can just say equals 47 minus those 16 cards. So 31 cards in the deck are good for us based upon the condition we laid out, and that's going to happen about 2/3 of the time on the next street. But going from the turn to the river, we still have those same 16 cards that are bad. So we have 46 minus those 16 gets us to 30 cards that we consider a good condition. And how often are we going to hit the turn and the river, meaning how often is it not going to contain a jack or higher? That is going to be 43% of the time. We can check the answer key real quick and make sure we're on the right track. Page 105, 10s, 43%. Good, we did everything correct and used the runout spreadsheet correctly. But did you notice here that the runout is going to contain an overcard a pretty good chunk of the time? So for the players that constantly complain, oh, it's always an overcard in this spot. Well, not always, but more than half the time, and that might be a little bit shocking if you've never worked with a calculator like this before. But anyway, we still have one more spreadsheet to go, and this is the all-in EV spreadsheet. It's a little bit scary at first, but let's run through it together. Alright, heading over to page 117 of the Advanced Poker Workbook, we're in the river play section when facing bets. Here's the prompt. It's a 5-10 cash game. You 3-bet pre-flop and they call. Flop gets checked through. You call their turn bet and they barrel 225 into the river of 410. So here's the spot in the board. Our hand is ace king. Nice turn card for us. And here's our opponent's range according to the solver. And what we want to look at, yes, the overall exercise is going to look at the pot odds right this moment and the EV of just calling, but what I want to focus on is how to use the all-in EV EV spreadsheet so we can look at this bottom section, which is the EV of going all in. So for this, we just need to plug in a couple different numbers when we open up the all in EV spreadsheet. Notice there are some different tabs down below. I'm just going to use the shoving prefop EV spreadsheet or tab. And yes, I know it says prefop, but honestly, the formulation is the exact same. So don't worry that it says prefop. All the numbers and formula and process for this is going to be just fine. So pot size before shoving is a 635, right? The 410 pot plus our opponent's 225 bet gets us a total pot size right this moment of 635. How much do we call? Well, there's a 225 bet if we were just calling here. How much are we shoving? We have the smaller of the stacks involved, so we are going to shove for 940 total. And then we just need these two numbers down below, and then the EV will calculate for us. So the prompt in the workbook says, now what if you went all in and they only called with ace X or better, so top pair plus. So we can go into Flopzilla, we can plug all that in. This is the range taken directly from the answer key, page number 17. Just copy that, paste it in here. Notice all of the weights are already in here. We have the board, we have our hand, and let's rock and roll. So if we think our opponent's only going to continue with top pair plus, which is going to be anything that's ace X or better, then we notice that they are continuing 56% of the time and thus folding the other 44%. And we can plug that right in here. How often villain folds? 44% of the time when we shove. And then what is our equity when called? So what we can do is, since we have top pair plus in here, we can click this in, and this is going to filter for only the hands that we have selected. So when they continue with top pair plus, our equity in that situation is 69%. Go over here, equity when called, 69. And you notice that the EV is plus EV to the tune of 638. If we round, easy peasy, plus 638. Excellent. Open up the answer key, proof it out real quick. What's the EV of going all in? Plus 638 based upon the parameters we just got out of Flopzilla, and all is good so far. But one of the things that makes this spreadsheet really cool is that instead of just giving you the answer, it also gives you some EV scenarios down below if there are some different changes to the overall input. So if there is a little bit of bump on the equity, a little bit of bump on how often your opponent folds, a little bit of bump on both, all the way up to plus 10% on both and negative 10% on both. That is extremely helpful to visualize this, especially when spots start getting a little bit thin and maybe it's closer to break even. This can really help you say, okay, well, what if it's like slightly better parameters or assumptions or slightly worse parameters or assumptions? This way you can look at more scenarios at a single glance. But that is how we can use the all-in EV spreadsheet. Very helpful for doing situations where we could shove and there are multiple branches, right? Because in this spot we could shove, our opponent could fold right this moment, we pick up the pot uncontested, we could shove, our opponent calls and we win, or we could shove, our opponent calls and we lose, and this looks at all of those scenarios all in one easy, simple number. So those are the 7 poker calculators that you should 100% be using between sessions to analyze hands of your own, or just jump into a Discord and be able to analyze somebody else's hand. These are very helpful tools, and again, you can get all of these plus a ton more in my spreadsheet pack, splitsuit.com/sheets to jump in. Again, it's a name your own price product. If you want to enter 0, no problem, get them all for free. Otherwise, throw in a little bit, get a bunch of goodies and bonuses, and I think you're massively going to enjoy these tools. If nothing else, just make sure you get them. They're extremely helpful. And just for the record, I know I went through some of this stuff a little bit quickly, and if you felt pretty darn comfortable with it, I definitely challenge you to pick up the Advanced Poker Workbook today. Get started. It's going to help you a tremendous amount, especially as it explores some of these calculators through the lens of GTO ranges and also comparing them to exploitative ranges. Splitsuit.com/advanced to learn more. Or if you felt very uncomfortable during this and you're like, I don't really know what the heck these topics are, I don't know what the heck the formulas are, I don't know what these calculators are even doing, I would definitely suggest checking out the Prefop and Math Workbook first. It's going to be very helpful. It takes you more by the hand, explains the formulas a little bit better, and I would definitely suggest that. Splitsuit.com/prefop to learn more about that one. But either way, these are excellent workbooks that are very helpful for studying this game between sessions, so that way in real time you're making much better decisions and you understand this game at a more technical level. But anyway, that's going to wrap it for this video. If you have any comments or questions, please do not hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, as always, good luck out there and happy grinding.